From the California State Senate, this is Senate Spotlight.
Hello there and welcome to this segment of Senate Spotlight, where we discuss legislative priorities, policy, and other related issues with members of the California State Senate. And from the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green, and joining us back here once again is State Senator Bob Hertzberg, a senator from the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. Good to see you again, sir.
Oh, it was good, man.
Chair of the Senate Committee on Governance and Finance.
Whatever that means,
Yeah.
but I'll make it big.
I heard a phrase or a saying not too long ago. They said the term lawmaker should be a verb, not just a noun. You know who I thought of? Was you. So how's your verbing been last week? You come to the end of session here, close to it. How you been doing? Been doing good?
Great. It's been great. I came back with energy and with idealism. I know people are down on government, but I have enough experience. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Are there a lot of landmines? You're damn right there are. But can we navigate them and do good things for folks? No question.
And a level playing field. How often have you heard that? Yeah. Well, good. No, you're doing great public policy here, back here in the state senate. Let's go Hertzberging here, using the verb analogy.
All way.
First, let's start out in the context of the state budget. Your imprint actually was really on this last state budget, particularly dealing with higher education and funding for schools. But in particular, you had another piece which really affects so many people here in California, not to mention nationwide. Your SB 405 dealing with the reducing of the unreasonable fees that are added to traffic infractions, minor traffic infractions, and the creation of this traffic amnesty program. Right. Set the scene for us, and how does this make a difference to people who see these fees pile up without even blinking?
Well, you know what happens in government, really, in large measure, we think about ourselves. How are we going to fund a program? How are we going to do this? We're not thinking about the everyday Californian and how it affects their lives. So if you get in the old days, you get a traffic ticket for failing to stop, it's $35. But even I was a contributor to this. I'm not acting like I'm some prima donna on this. I made the mistakes when 20 years ago almost, when I was chairman of the Public Safety Committee. We added on fees because we needed money for this and money for that, and we didn't want to take it out of the regular general fund. Well, it comes to that $35 tickets now, $238. And if you can't afford to pay it, you lose your license. And guess what? 4.8 million people over the last 8 years lost their licenses. The system has become ridiculous.
And $10 billion in uncollected debt.
Well, and that's the thing. What's it more than uncollected debt? It's illusory. We get out there and say, well, we're going to create this account to raise money for government. And so all you do is you hurt people on the one hand and you raise no money on the other. Boy, how smart is that, right? So we fixed it. Basically an amnesty program for folks, people with less resources. They can pay as little as 20%. We give them a payment plan to pay a payment plan over time. The second they get their payment plan, they get their license back. If they want to go to court and argue their case, our bill says that you can argue first, pay later if you lose. Same thing if you fail to appear. Trying to bring some sensibility back to the system and move it focused back to everyday Californians and what their lives are and what we're trying to achieve, rather than just pile on a fee anywhere, tax anything you can, do whatever you got to do, and think it through in long-term manner. And this is one of many, many steps I'm going to take in government to try to bring some common sense back to everyday Californians and care about them more than we care about ourselves.
And the courts still have the power, right, to garnish wages or even to impose community service, that kind of thing?
Sure. Good. But at least you don't lose your license. We talk about people that license, 4.8 million people without driver's licenses. What is that? What about insurance? What are the other consequences to that? And we don't even collect the money on top of it. Dumber than a box of rocks. I got nothing else to say.
Well, something that is actually as smart as a box of rocks here. One of your legislative passions is improving access to government, making information about government more accessible. You've been doing this since you were in the Assembly. I remember all of your efforts to try to make government more transparent and accessible. You have a new bill, SB 272, that asks local governments in particular to access and assess and catalog all of their systems to see how they're using information and making it more transparent. Give us more details. And again, why is this important?
The world is changing. Technology is fundamentally changing everything that we do. You're getting a car, you got a GPS system, built, by the way, on the federal government's cheap satellite system. You got apps for everything, right? And that's the private sector side. On the government sector side, we've been slow to adopt. And the world's changed. And so this is first in many, many steps that are going to take over the next number of years to figure out how thoughtfully and intelligently, not looking at one particular vendor, but how do we really create systems that can work well for people? How can we tell people, hey, wait a second, there's an oversupply of energy, turn your charge your car or turn your washer on rather than turn it off. Doing things that are really valuable to folks. We've seen it in the private sector where they use Zillow, this program where it gathers property tax data, school data, crime data for people to buy houses, and they've been successful. There's a lot of data out there that the government uses, and we need to kind of develop a really thoughtful, intelligent approach. How much water does it take to water plants in one county versus another? Are people really leaving the state, or are those businesses just moving to another county? All of this data that you can get from business licenses, from all sorts of things that are filed with government, to then bring it into the real world and revolutionize California. You know, we talk about California being the future. It has to happen. We got to make it the future.
Do the governments have the staff and infrastructure to do this mandate,
Well,
as you
you know
compel them
what?
to do this?
Guess what? Get a life. Get a life. I'm sorry. You know, I used to hear this on the voting stuff. We're trying to make voting easier for people, and they're telling me how hard it is. You got for 8% turnout in LA, and you're belly aching, you don't got enough staff. You know what? Get another job. I don't care. This is ridiculous. Let's take care of folks. Let's not worry about that stuff. That's secondary. Let's figure out a solution to the problem, and then let's flip on it. The reality is, I talked to Riverside County's technology people, and they say they can do the whole thing in 2 weeks.
So there are Bob Hertzberg-like folks out there that are standing up and saying, let's do this. Let's do this now.
Let's do this. There are a lot of people out there saying, let's do it.
In fact, let me broaden on that. As you go through and meet representatives from local government in your district, in Reseda and Van Nuys and Pacoima, do you find, and I usually get the Bob Hertzberg-like staffers who say, you know what, I'm not going to just be a bureaucrat. I'm actually going to do this, and I'm going to work.
Absolutely, absolutely. These people are hardworking folks. They're stuck in these trends. They're stuck in a position where they're getting in trouble if they say yes, and that they're easy to default to no. We got to change that culture, man. And technology is going to help us in a big way to make it more transparent to do that stuff. Will there be glitches? Of course. Get a life. There's always glitches. But you know what? The status quo is taking us backwards. The river's flowing the other direction, my brother, and we've got to charge ahead. This is a democracy, and you look at every great civilization, and you got to charge ahead and challenge the status quo.
Do we sacrifice security in this effort towards transparency?
No, because
That's
a
big concern.
Yeah, well, it is. It's a big voiced concern. The truth of the matter is there's already a law that says nothing's disclosed if it affects security. It was passed 4 years ago. It already exists on the books. I've taken it all the stuff on this disclosure stuff for starters, because these belly achers. But the reality is, and one of the things we got to do in the legislature is to push back on all these interest groups and tell them, I'm sorry. You know what? I gave you these 3 things. That's it. Get a life.
All right, let's move on to another part of life, from big data to green energy choice. You have another piece of legislation allows retail electricity customers to contract directly for their power supplies, direct access calling, seeking their own renewable energy sources. Tell us about SB 286.
Well, I spent all the time I've been out of government working in the green space, and I really learned it. And I learned about markets. I learned about what's happening in the world. I learned that Sweden imports its trash because it doesn't have enough trash to burn because it recycles everything. I look at the Maldives with a 100% renewable portfolio standard. I've learned the world, and I've learned there's a big delta often between what's happening out in the world and what we promote and where we are. We're just not as good as we say we are comparatively. We just don't look at Malawi and some other parts of the planet. Bottom line is this. What I'm trying to do is fill a hole. You've got the pro tem coming up with 50%. At the same time, for standards, at the same time, we have certain facilities that are coming offline from the old days when I was speaker during the energy crisis, and so those people can't get contracts. How cool is it that we have, on the one hand in California, solar, wind, biomass facilities that can't be employed because the law is written in a way that's odd, and then we're telling everybody else we want to go to 50%. All I'm doing is getting the companies that are creative and want to do this and matching them with these other companies that are coming offline and giving some space and giving an opportunity because of that to reduce prices. We're still marching forward toward the green energy plan, but this to me is just filling a hole. You've got Fran Pavley over here, you've got Kevin DeLeon over here. I come in and I wanted to try to find places where I could be helpful in the larger discussion, and that's what this does.
Are you disadvantaging domestic customers, non-retail customers who maybe don't have that flexibility of entrepreneurship and ideas?
No, because there's protections in the law. First of all, every producer has to produce 115%. So we already have a protection. We've done a brilliant job since the energy crisis in creating serious protections. We also have costs if you want to come back on, where you pay the costs. We have a number of different kinds of protections to make sure that the price price isn't otherwise shifted to those other customers. And the Public Utilities Commission, as well as all the utilities, have said, we agree, that law works.
There was even a concern that this could reinstate, with this freedom, if you will, for these retailers to purchase their own power, to reinstate utility deregulation, and we don't want to go there again, which you and I certainly remember from the early 2000s. So is that a valid concern?
Well, it's always, look, the one thing you learn, the biggest thing I learned about the energy crisis is the law of unintended consequences and the fact that perfect storms can exist. So I'm always on my toes in that regard. I'm never someone who's going to poo-poo that stuff. But at the same time, I think that over the last dozen years, we've really built in extraordinary protections that make that work and make sure that we don't have that problem again. And I just think that those kinds of words are thrown out as red meat to try to, obfuscate the real issues. And is there underlying a question you should always be concerned about? Unequivocally. But I don't think it's the case here.
And do you think that these companies, these direct access providers, can be depended on to provide consistently? Which I guess goes back to our deregulation issues and concerns.
Doesn't matter. So if they don't, the utilities will come back and provide. And worst comes to worst, they have the capacity to do so. The amount that we're adding is just a small amount of increase. It's not like we're opening up the complete market. We're basically raising a cap. And where there was a long, long line of people wanting to get into buy in this market. So I think it's not an issue. If it was completely eliminating it, I would suggest that's a fair observation. But it's it's 8,000 gigawatt hours, and in code that sounds like a lot, but that's really not very much.
All right, SB 8, you came into your Senate office here this year with this idea for modernizing California's tax structure. I know you had it beforehand, moving us all forward with education funding and job creation, business climate. I know it's a work in progress. Give us again, explain how this can really upend and change for the better California's tax structure.
Well, status quo in California is not good. Right? During the downturn, we had a 3.7 drop in our GDP, 23% drop in our budget because we're relying on the wrong stuff. So all I'm trying to do is to step back and say, okay, let's modernize this thing. I had a long meeting yesterday on this. I have not stopped working on it. I wouldn't say I work on it every day, but just about every day. Meetings, building coalitions, refining the ideas. From the last time I was here, the issues dramatically refined. I'm not a demagogue on this. We have a problem. We can watch the Titanic sink under the current structure. We can play this game of ballot box budgeting when it goes up and down and people come in with power to be able to create their benefits. Or we can be what we should be, a thoughtful legislative and executive branch that basically looks long-term and thinks about the future. So when you've got 80% of the economy on services, right? And you don't tax them, what's that? The governor jokes about Pilates, right? I looked at a bunch of other states. By the way, when you look at all 50 states plus the District of Columbia, we rank 44th in terms of number of states that have services. Hawaii, out of 175 categories of service, taxes 169. New Mexico, South Dakota, all these little states, and all of whom, except for Delaware, have sales tax on goods. So this is not some new bizarre idea. Lawyers are taxed, doctors are taxed, Pilates instructors are taxed, accountants are taxed in many, many other states. And so we've substantially revised this, but it's not a bizarre idea. And fundamentally, it means that all of us have to bite the bullet a little bit for the common good. And what's wrong with that?
Well, the current market volatility, stock market volatility that we're hearing about, and if you're not a day trader, you probably shouldn't worry about it. But in the meantime,
right.
This bitterly proves your point here that
right.
If this were to become law, this would provide some stability and
right.
balance.
A large percentage of the taxes that we rely on are these capital gains taxes. When I was Speaker, we had $14 billion in extra taxes. Now we have a rainy day fund where it's got to go away in this lockbox. So we have it for potential futures. So the bottom line of it all is that it's just trying on a bipartisan basis to sit back and say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? We want an economy that has less and more stability so you don't spend a bunch of money and your government's not on and off and it sends a message all around the world that's horrible. You want to create a standard of upward mobility for folks that have opportunities, irrespective of party, to get both education and a job. You want to align, and you need to do that, you have to align and modernize the tax structure to where the economy is. This tax structure is 80 years old. It doesn't work anymore. We're taxing horseshoes when we should be taxing ball games, and it's just, it's time to fix it and tell the truth.
Let's tell the truth and work with, let's talk about, just as a final note here, about the students, about the kids. It's been a month and a half ago, but I just remember the day on the Senate floor. Members of the Granada Hills Charter High School academic decathlon team, there were special recognition ceremonies because they won the 2015 National Academic Decathlon. National. And then you started throwing questions out, like what is the standard reduction potential of gold? And none of us had the answers, but these students did.
They did.
So that was
I didn't even know what the question meant. It was
I mean, you were like a proud dad then.
It was phenomenal. And you know, the San Fernando Valley, Senator Pavley made the point, there's been a couple of other schools in the valley that have won nationals. Maybe it's something in the water or something, but it's pretty cool to see these kids. And the final point I'll make is, this is just not the brainiacs. They require A students, B students, and C students. And these C students have to work, as they say in Yiddish, their kishkas out, which means guts, to be able to get in there and do this stuff. And they're just phenomenal. It's really quite interesting to see. And lastly, it's just interesting to see how diverse the group is. They're from all parts of the world. It's so cool.
Well, these are the future of our country, of our state. One final thought. I just want to get this for you. Atlantic Magazine in June had an article where they polled the millennials, and compared to their Generation X counterparts, they're losing confidence in the American dream. Everybody says, you know what, work hard, study hard, you're going to be a success. But they're not necessarily seeing that. They're seeing it, it's going to take money. You got to have money to move. And they're losing faith in meritocracy, and they're getting more faith in the dollar. It's sort of a American Dream 2.0. What do you say to these students who are on the verge, on the edge of something great in their lives, applying to college, moving on, but there's these roadblocks. They're still there. What do you say?
Well, I mean, partly it's mostly listening to them. Democracy is about listening and understanding where people are going and marrying that with some wisdom of where the roadblocks are. You can't come out and tell everybody what to do. They've got their own opinions, and it's important. That's what democracy is, respect folks, right? But you got to be able to help educate them. I just spoke to the Senate fellows and stuff, and help give them some roadways of where to go and what they'll see, and hopefully they listen to it. But yeah, the rules are changing. Technology's changing. America, you know, the world is. We talk about democracy. We talk about growth of folks. Well, the reality is, the standard of living on a worldwide basis among the 7.2 billion people is up dramatically. It's just up in countries that went from $100 a month in salary to $200 a month. And those challenge us greater. And so how do we stay at the top of the heap? How do we 70-year-old Muhammad Ali and still taking on all comers? It's really challenging. And one of the things I learned by being out of the government for so long and traveling the world is that this is a global issue, and California needs to understand it in a global context of how we compete in those markets. And so, and what our expectations are, and whether we can continue to afford it, and how do we do that? And the answer is yes, but we've just got to be better, smarter, faster. And these millennials, they're brilliant. I've got them in my office, 54 interns. These kids, they're coming up with the greatest ideas, and I'm just letting them run.
Great. Thank you for being better, smarter, and brilliant on behalf of California. We appreciate it. Good to see you again. Always fun to talk to you.
Always good.
Bob Hertzberg, State Senator from California's San Fernando Valley, and that is it for this edition of Senate Spotlight. Join us next time around as we discuss important legislative issues and policies with the newsmakers and newsbreakers of the California State Senate. From the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching Senate Spotlight.